So, Dr. Deri, who happens to be the department and forensic, he's from the LTMG Medical College, professor of toxicology and forensic science, who is in charge of the COVID center at BKC, which is one of the most crowded center. It's a 1,000+ bedded hospital with ICU facility. He has been attached to it for last 1.5 years. He has seen both the waves that unfortunately we are experiencing today is the second mutant. So to start with, my first question would go to Dr. Hira. You have worked very closely with the authorities, both in the United Nations as well as here in India at the Ministry of Health level. How do you put the first wave and the second wave that we are going through at this moment? What is the variant and why we should be all concerned about the second pandemic that we are going through at this moment?
Well, thank you, Mr. Menon. Thank you for inviting me with this distinguished group of journalists. The Mumbai journalists actually have the global respect and the way the coverage really happens from here. Thank you. I will give you a little brief of the wave one that was actually coming in soon after the cases had already happened in Wuhan in October of 2019. And this was the basic generic virus, the one we call it as coronavirus type 2.
Voice is not audible.
The type 1 had already been the one. Am I audible?
Yeah, clear, Dr. Hira.
Okay.
Can Dr. Hira be heard?
Okay. So, yeah, I'll speak a little louder. That's the, yeah. So the type 1 of this coronavirus had caused Ebola for some time. The bat virus in the Central Africa, starting with Liberia and countries like DRC Congo and Benin. You have one more. And so there are 4 countries in the cluster. Nigeria was the 5th one. So in the cluster of these countries, the outbreaks happened. These were happening for a pretty long time, since 1976. But that is another story, that although it was a virus, a cousin virus to this second coronavirus that we are now dealing with as COVID, the wave happened in India about 4 months later. And by that time, there were some countries who were forceful enough to shut down, were Taiwan and Cambodia. To date, Taiwan and Cambodia, the only 2 countries which have had very few cases, about 30+ cases, and they still are very less touched with this virus. So again, the wave 1 went up, it peaked around September last year, and then started plateauing, and we all have lived through it. And by, say, January, we were all looking at what next. And we already know that by that time, most of European countries, Australia, the US, were already having the second wave. So the second wave was seen to be coming. Only thing is that the variants, the mutants, were not yet identified that time. We got the identification of these variants that came in from South Africa, the British, the Brazilian, and the Japanese. So these were happening restricted to one country or one region. So the second wave, we now focused now. We have the world's largest number of COVID cases, and the deaths have really started mounting. And the second wave is not the end. We know sometime in a few months, we will probably plateau off, and towards some models are showing that by October or December, we are going to get more flatter wave 2. But you have countries like Norway and Sweden, which already have the wave 3, and Australia has wave 4. And they are really in a bad shape. So I'll stop here to let this process build up, and we will fill up as we go along. I'll stop here so that you are able to take it forward.
Vinod, you have to unmute.
Yeah, got it. So I would appreciate that, Dr. Hira. I'll come to you again with my second part of the question. But I want to ask Dr. Savardekar, who is also in charge of the St. George's Hospital. Now, the problem that we people are facing at ground level is no support, no help. The war rooms are made. You have given all the numbers for people to contact in distress. But the irony today is the end user is not able to get any sort of recourse. Dr. Savardekar, can you please put some light on this? Because the second wave has actually created a kind of fear psychosis in the mind of common man. Because you have helpline numbers that are displayed. You try calling them up when you are really in need, and you realize that that helpline number is not coming in way to help you in any way. Can you just throw some light? Do you feel that like this could be a kind of problem that most of the city people are facing? Because almost every hospital has got 100+ wait list. There is no ICU bed available. There is no venti facility, nor there is life-saving drugs available. Dr. Savardekar, your view on this? Is Dr. Savardekar around?
Yeah, he was there.
Hello.
I think it's muted.
Oh, he's come back. He's come back.
Yeah, Dr. Savardekar, hi. Hi. You want me to repeat my question to you, or you're comfortable answering it?
No, sir. Actually, I was not in the link. So can you please repeat the question?
Okay. My question is quite simple. The scenario at present where we have a wave 2 already set in, the helpline numbers are all displayed by the authorities. The BMC have put up a war room. But when in reality, you try calling up these helpline numbers, you realize that you are completely helpless because these helpline numbers are not providing any help. There is no hospital beds, there is no ICU beds available, there is no venti facility, no ambulance facility. My question to you is, how do you tackle this kind of scenario? Because you are in direct touch with the nodal committee, the task force committee appointed by the state authorities for tackling COVID. So can you throw light, what is the way out for people who are in distress at this point in time?
For this, actually, I would suggest to see, we deal with the scenario where the patients are directly coming to the JJ hospital. When they approach the JJ hospital from there, they are segregated, that they are kept in a separate ward where the COVID test is done. And then if it is negative, then they are admitted in the JJ hospital. And if it comes to be positive, then those patients are referred to the St. George Hospital, and where we treat them. The other scenario around is, means if you are able to bring the patient in a government setup, as far as possible, if the beds are available, we try to treat them the utmost of our capacity, at the best of our.
Dr. Savardekar, can you pick the mic? You are not audible at this moment.
We've lost.
Yeah, Dr. Savardekar, you are there? Hello. Hello.
Maybe you can go on to the.
Yeah.
Other...
So we have. Hello, Dr. Savardekar, have you joined back? Okay, fine. Yeah. Okay. Dr. Bal, this is my question to you. You have a vast experience of almost 40+ years, and being a diabetic food expert. Now, you know that diabetes, comorbid issue, is something that we have been dealing with, and comorbid is the biggest challenge as far as COVID is concerned. So one of the area that is also there, like the elderly parents who may have diabetes or who may have diabetic food. How do you tackle where patient is not able to come down to hospital, or they're not able to dress up the wound, especially amidst COVID? Because one side the panic of getting COVID, and the other side is also the treatment that need to be given for the existing ailment. So how do you manage this kind of challenges?
Dr. Savardekar is back, huh? We know.
Yeah, I'll come back to Dr.
Yeah.
Savardekar. Let me finish off Dr. Bal, since the question has been
Yeah,
put to him.
okay.
Yeah.
So what we have been doing from last year and now also currently, we never call the patient directly to the hospital. We have a teleconsultation going on regularly. We see the wounds. If they appear to be very controllable, we advise the patient how to do the dressing at home, control the blood sugar, and tell them the warning signs is how the if the wounds are spreading, and then in that case call us. Our department is running fully for whole last year, not a single day, including Sunday, we have stopped our services. So we are catering to all sorts of a patient. In fact, we have done almost 460 surgeries last year, and in this year we have done about 200 surgeries so far. So we are catering, but we don't call the patient for a small things. We advise them on the phone. Also, one thing I would like to just point out is that we are seeing a lot of post-COVID syndrome patients of the leg in diabetes. These patients are asymptomatic, they have not been tested, and they suddenly come with a thrombosis of the leg vessels causing acute gangrene. And when we test them for antibodies, it shows a very high antibodies, means that they have been already infected once. So in such cases, our advice to all patients and whomever is listening is that in case you get acute pain in the leg, don't wait, immediately rush to your doctor, because that needs an emergency treatment. We have treated 8 patients in last 1 month. Out of that, 6 we could save, 2 we unfortunately died because they came late. So this is one complication of COVID because of a clotting of a blood, post-COVID syndrome, which occurs sometime in about 8 to 10 weeks after COVID in many patients. Some patients get cardiac problems, some get cerebral blockage and kidney blockage, all that. But this is specifically in the leg, because we found that the patients who have pain in the leg keep on applying some Ayurvedic medicine, massage, and they suddenly crash and go into bad septicemia. So this is how we have been tackling, and we have a trained dressers who go home and do dressing even in time of COVID in case patient is unable to do that. So we have been providing service throughout the whole year and even currently also.
So, sir, this DFD issue, are you also witnessing this in youngsters these days more because due to lifestyle problem, many youngsters are now diabetic too. So they are type 2 and
Yeah,
many
yeah.
youngsters. So what is the age group of people that you are now seeing? Because when we used to talk about DFD, that was almost like, 55, 60-year-old or 70-year-old with prolonged diabetes, and then they would have the DFD issue. But are you now, when you're seeing youngsters also with the diabetic foot, what is the age group, and what is the advice that you would like to give to them to protect their feet, especially when it is like, they know they are diabetic and they have high risk of getting thrombosis or bad bleeding veins?
Yeah, see, there is all the young group of age group of diabetic patients is much younger in India as compared to other Western countries. The average age group is between 35 to 50 as compared to the Western countries. And this is 50% of a population of diabetics, which is about 74 million in India, is of this age group 35 to 50. So we teach them how to take care of their feet and ask them to wear proper footwear, do their exercise properly. And the most important for the pains and aches, not to do any home remedies or whatever is shown on TV and various WhatsApp groups and all, because those are the things which cause maximum harm to the leg. The most important is always wear a proper footwear, keep the skin smooth without becoming dry, and control your blood sugar. If the blood sugar is controlled, the problem in the feet are drastically reduced, because they are all stimulated or generated by the fluctuating blood sugar. But you are right, the age group is becoming younger and younger.
Okay. And so what are the early symptoms of DFD in
The
youngsters that
most
you are coming
important
across?
symptom is that loss of sensation.
Okay.
Prior to loss of sensation, you start getting various other sensations like tingling, numbness, or intermittent pain. and then the loss of sensation comes. If the patient finds that when he walks and walks barefoot, he doesn't feel the floor, that's a warning sign that his nerves are getting damaged because of diabetes and uncontrolled blood sugar, and that's likely to cause problem in the leg. So he needs to go to the doctor, do the test, use proper footwear, proper socks, and take care of the skin. And most of the times, 90% of the times, he can avoid problem.
Okay. I'm coming back to
I
Dr.
think
Rajesh Dere. Hi.
Dr.
Okay.
Dere
Dr.
has
Dere
joined
has
us.
come in. Okay. It's
Yeah.
interesting. So before I go to Dr. Savadekar, I had left out a question to Dr. Savadekar, but thank you, Dr. Dere. Amidst your tight schedule, you have joined us. Dr. Dere, my question to Dr. Savadekar was, you have seen the COVID phase that Mumbai has been witnessing since last year. The first phase, you people were setting up the COVID care centers and all that. The scene was not as bad as it is being witnessed at this point in time. Could you just take us around at that area when, like, last year, how the scenario was and how suddenly the scenario got changed to a situation today where we are struggling every single day? Dr. Dere. Dr. Dere, you can unmute yourself. You can unmute yourself here.
Yeah, thank you. Now, initially, the difference between this phase and the first phase. Now, in this phase, people are not that much feared of.
You lost Dr. Dere.
Yeah, so this is another.
Yeah.
Dr. Dere, you're there, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
I'm trying to join in. One.
Yeah.
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 Yes, it's in. Sorry. This phase, basically, the changes in the first and second phases. First phase, if you take the number of cases, was not that much what we have today. Now, nearly second phase, the number of positive cases have nearly doubled, or I would say more than doubled. I could recollect the maximum number of positive cases in Mumbai, that is 2,873, was in somewhere mid-September. Now, if you go by the last week data, we are near to 10,000, or someday we have crossed 10,000. Now, the first wave, if I could recollect from March till June, the fear factor amongst the healthcare workers and the patients were 10 times more than what now we have. After that, there was a decline in the first wave because of, I'll talk of Mumbai. Mumbai managed COVID in a better way as compared to any other city. But somewhere,
You can have
after
a glass of
Diwali,
water. Dr. Dere, you can have a glass of water. We are comfortable to hang on. Yeah.
thank you.
Yeah.
After this September or October, because of good COVID management, restrictions, and we can say larger people participation for COVID appropriate behavior, the number of cases in Mumbai, I think, went down till 463, if I'm not wrong. Now suddenly Diwali came, and because of decrease in the number, sizable decrease in the number, even government thought, now we are declining in economy, there is decline in the employment ratio, there is decline in the payment capacity of each and every individual. So by virtue of that, government of Maharashtra started relaxing phase-wise. I could recollect during the time of Diwali, I think the third phase of relaxation was over, by virtue of which all the public transporters, say trains, public transport. Thereafter, started the phase of vaccination, in which by virtue of which people thought there was, few people thought, vaccines have come, there is no need to fear, and number is much less. So after Diwali, during the time of Diwali, I went to Dadar market or any market. There was sudden flogging of hundreds of people. Hardly 2 or 3% of the people were having masks. And leave aside, to take any shop, the vendor or the boy was to give some sarees, anything, material. He had developed a new fashion of having a mask which was below the nose. So it was equal to nothing wearing
not mask.
not a mask.
Yeah.
So that went for some 2 or 3 months.
Yeah.
And over and above this, the fear concept after decrease of the number and availability of the vaccines, the fear concept of COVID has started declining in the general population.
Okay.
Then, after Diwali, nightlife, marriages, 400 people, 500 people in marriages without masks. Political gathering, I think. I don't know why somebody who cannot comment on political gatherings. If we say gathering of 100 people in COVID pandemic for say any function or marriage is disastrous or it can spread COVID, then why not political gathering of thousands?
True.
Will it not spread this disease?
True.
Why somebody is not talking on this and why government is not having restrictions on political sabhas, political gatherings? Anyone is collecting hundreds of people and coming on the road without mask and shouting anything.
Yeah.
The only rules are to be for the people who behave. The rules are only for the marriages, only for the functions. Then we also feel if they can gather in hundreds or thousands, why I cannot do marriage taking 100 people into consideration? Then came a phase, the rituals, or I would say, when we, in the COVID era, only 5 to 10 people were allowed for going along with cremation.
Yeah.
And once the relaxation was won, hundreds of people went for cremation. Then without mask, without social distancing, and I have read in newspaper, in that gathering, few people got infected.
Okay.
So
Dr.
somewhere
Dere, what
this
is yeah? So as compared to what it was earlier, and the sign of ailment, what people are coming in today to the center, what is the changes or what is the variant that you are seeing? Because right now we are talking about the second wave having the Brazil mutant virus or the UK variant. Now, how do you differentiate that, and what is the changes that you're seeing in the patients, the severity of the case when they come to you?
Basically, the basic change of this variant from previous changes, it is 30 to 40% more virulent than the first variant. Good part of this variant is more than 70% are mild cases. 30 to 32% need oxygen. 5 to 6% need step-down ICUs or high-definition unit or severe O2 ward. And nearly 2 to 3% cases are critical. This is what is seen. So even though we have increased in the number, if you see the case fatality ratio, or if you compare mortality with the first phase, it is less than 50% or 60%. But what is the problem? Along with this, we thought that vaccination would be rampant. The number of people getting vaccination should be maximum. So once we go along with the maximum number of vaccination, maximum people will get some prevention. I'll give a better example. There are few reported cases from my vaccination zone. After taking first dose, they got COVID. Age is more than 55 to 60 years. But even though they were at high risk, they could manage the COVID.
Hello, Dr. Dere.
We
I
lost,
think, yeah, we have lost Dr. Dere. Dr.
Sorry, Neeraj,
Vaibhav,
you take from.
yeah, Dr. Vaibhav, Dr. Dere has come. Okay. Can you hear me, Dr. Dere? Dr. Dere, you are unmuted. Can you unmute yourself, Dr. Dere? I think it's on the call. Okay, Dr. Vaibhav.
Yeah, please.
Yeah, Dr. Dere, can you hear me? This will be an on and off kind of experience what we will have, especially when we have this Zoom kind of connection and Zoom interactive session, because either the network may not support us, or sometimes, like, we may just go off radar. Coming back to Dr. Vaibhav, is he back? So Dr. Savardekar, are you with us, Dr. Savardekar? Are you there?
he's not there, I think.
He's not there. Okay. Dr. Hira, coming back to you, this is something that I wanted to ask you as a scientist, because we have seen the National Crime Record Bureau, they come up with a daily data saying that 27,000 people, they'll die every day in India, and there are over 300 reasons for death. Now, what is happening is the ICMR guidelines, which says that even if you are COVID suspect, and if your swab has been collected, and if you die unfortunately before or during the course of treatment, your death should be declared as COVID death. That can also happen as a COVID positive case, you will be declared as COVID dead. And so it's with the case where the report is pending, you are still expected to give the cause of death as COVID. Now, the question that arises, are we under-reporting other deaths, or are we over-reporting COVID deaths? So if you can throw some light on that, because this is a national data by a national agency. So on an average, we have 27,000 deaths happening otherwise for various reasons: cardiac arrest, health problem, poison, suicidal, accidental, whatever the reason be. But now bringing everything under the ambit of COVID, do you think like we are over-reporting the number of COVID deaths that is happening in our country today? And if yes, isn't it worrisome?
Yeah, I think you're right that the figure of national agency of 27,000 plus deaths daily in India, that's close to what I also know about. And it's actually like, you're talking of 5% plus minus of errors that come in waiting for the diagnosis of or cause of death, or whether to COVID or whether to other conditions, which get sort of overlooked. And there can be a 5% margin of error as far as the disease-specific deaths within these 27,000 are there. Now, that is generally considered that when you are taking this data and then putting it into models and try and see what is happening overall, this 5% is actually taken care of in the analysis. And this is the usual trend you find even in the best of the countries who have the best system of digitalizing everything. The deaths are digitalized, the births are digitalized, and everything is considered to be almost 100%, but it is not. So we are still closer to 95%. So in this case, my answer to your question will be that more or less, I don't see there is an overestimation of
Dr. Hira,
or a deliberate underestimation to COVID. We have to take, we will take it with a 5% error here and there, which is also statistically acceptable. And most countries have the same.
Okay, fine.
Yeah.
Dr. Savardekar, Okay, he has not come in. Dr. Dere, I want to ask you if you can unmute yourself, Dr. Dere. As compared to last year, where patients were easily managing to get hospital beds, we never had problem like basic oxygen shortage, or for that example reason having remdesivir or any other medicines. Why? Because all these helpline numbers that have now come up, I had asked this question to Savardekarji, but he had a different point of view at there. But I want to ask you, because you are directly working with the BMC headquarters, the war room, the additional commissioner Kakani is, you are directly reporting to him. Want to know this war room helpline numbers, the ambulance numbers, the oxygen setup, or for that matter, every private hospital today has a wait list of 100 plus. People are finding themselves helpless at ground level. I don't know where I'll take my relative tomorrow, or if he or she require an oxygen cylinder or an oxygen support. Had you faced this problem earlier too, or if not, why suddenly this problem? One side you're saying everything is good, it is not that serious, people are fine, it was not as compared to what it was earlier. The reason of spread you explained clearly, but then why this distress all of a sudden? Why people have to suffer? And where are we going wrong?
Please repeat.
So these helpline numbers, what we have got, these helpline numbers are of no use. The war rooms are not helping people in distress. Yeah. Last year, when the first wave came in, we were still managing everything without this kind of distress situation that people are finding themselves today. So if this time, according to you, if the situation is much better, then why people have to go through this distress? There is no oxygen cylinder available. There is no ICU beds available. There is no bed available in any private hospitals. And moreover, you don't have any life-saving medicines available. So why this sudden crisis?
No, as far as life-saving medicine, we are facing shortage of only remdesivir and all this.
Sir,
Other
SO2
medicines,
oxygen cylinders are not there. Tomilizumab is not available right now.
yeah, tocilizumab is not available.
Yeah.
Remdesivir is available in government hospital.
But yeah, so they have again restricted the usage of remdesivir. They said, like, the collector will intervene and ensure that no patient's relatives have to get
Yeah.
the remdesivir. But again, the hospitals are handing over chit to the relatives, asking them to get it. And even the helplines are not able to help people in distress. So what is the reason? What is going wrong?
Basically, what has happened? I don't know. It's somewhere it is imbibed in the minds of the general public that remdesivir and tocilizumab are the only life-saving drugs in crisis, which is not scientifically correct. Yes, at some stage, remdesivir, if given, will surely help you decrease the viral load. But nowadays, in our hospital, every day I'm getting 10, 20 calls. You give remdesivir is available in corporates, which we cannot give at all. But this should be avoided, that every intensivist or chest physician who is treating that case should follow this ICMR protocol, and if only indicated, should advise remdesivir. Now, over and above this, stock of remdesivir, I don't know. What I read in newspaper or what I see in television, whatever has been produced by this company are not evenly distributed in the state. Or I would be not wrong to say that these drugs should be given more in number to those states which have more number of cases. But practically it is going vice versa. So this is the case basically, and I don't understand this private pharmaceutical. Why cannot they produce enough number of remdesivir and tocilizumab if it is in demand by the physician?
But is it now that the control of the supply of remdesivir, the center has taken it in its control, and the center would decide how much remdesivir a state need to get in? Now, for instance, the other day, Rajesh Tope had come to make a statement that he had insisted for 36,000 vials of remdesivir, but they got only 26,000. So was like, some other political leaders saying they demanded for 50,000, but that 50,000 did not come in. Do you think the centralized supply of this life-saving, because I'm using the word life-saving again, because it has done wonders in certain patients, and patients who were otherwise critical have come out. So do you think, like, having a controlled supply from the central government make any sense in such kind of pandemic situation? Dr. Dere, yeah.
Controlled supply, I agree with this, but over and above this, why we are making overuse of unwarranted use of remdesivir?
So that your team is doing it, right? Inside the intensive care unit, we don't have access inside. So you know how much you are using and on whom you are using it,
Hello?
right? So it is again the intensivists who are using these drugs, right? And had it not been working, the doctors at the intensive care units would not have written and prescribed it to the relatives, right? The only thing is that all the doctors are writing, even if it is a small nursing home to a bigger COVID center like yours, or for that matter, like, a nursing home, they all have been writing remdesivir.
And this is what we are not controlling our own medical expert. And I will give you a best example. In previous phase, remdesivir and tocilizumab were used at large. I know in July, April and July, I think this tocilizumab was sold for 80,000 and 90,000.
Yes.
After that, WHO came with an article that tocilizumab is of no use in treating COVID. But why WHO advice is not followed by the treating physicians? This is something I feel is lacking for the treating doctors.
So are you saying like our
8 days
doctors,
before also.
sir, are you saying our doctors don't know, the right hand doesn't know what the left hand is doing, and there's no control over
Same,
that?
yeah.
So who is responsible for it, sir?
The responsibility is that even the state task force, they should also, educate all the fraternity that this is what is the fact of remdesivir. This is what is the fact of tocilizumab. And please do not overwrite these drugs. Please do not use these drugs unjudiciously. Please, always we all should keep in mind.
Yeah, Dr. Dere.
That both these drugs have adverse effect also.
Okay.
Now I will read out an article. I'll just read out an article.
Yeah.
Roche provides an update on the phase 3 Coacta trial of Actemra, Roactemra in hospitalized patient with severe COVID-19 associated pneumonia. Coacta trial did not meet its primary endpoint of improved clinical status in patients with COVID-19 associated pneumonia, or the key secondary endpoint of reduced patient mortality. The study is the first global randomized double-blind placebo-controlled phase trial investigating Actemra, Roactemra in this setting. Roche remains committed to continuing the Actemra, Roactemra clinical trial programs in COVID-19 to further explore Actemra, Roactemra in other treatment settings, including in combination with an antiviral.
Okay.
It is clear now.
Absolutely right. So want to ask a simple question. Do you have remdesivir at your center, and do you make use of it?
I have. Yesterday only we went out of stock, but we were supplied 1,000 ampule by municipal corporation, and we are waiting for it.
So 1,000 you have already utilized on patients who are there inside, right?
Yeah, but what is good part in BKC, we have made a strict protocol. To be very frank with you, This we have more than,
Hmm.
I think 600 patients on board.
Hmm.
And hardly we are giving remdesivir daily to 30 to 40 people.
Okay. Okay.
So we probably are making judicial use of remdesivir.
So how many patients below 45 years of age right now who is on critical support system at your COVID center?
Critical.
Yeah.
You
Below
mean to
45.
say
Below 45
below 45
requiring support.
requiring
Support.
support.
Life support.
Means intensive care support
Intensive care support. Yeah.
or a BiPAP.
Either way, because the saturation you require BiPAP as well as the intensive care.
See,
Below
below
45.
45, I have more than 62 patients now.
And what is that you are seeing in them? Because this was not the case earlier last year. Because last year we had all elderly people above 50 who were showing symptoms, who were getting comorbid because of comorbid condition. They needed ICU support. What about this youngsters, sir? Because we are young professional journalists, most of us venture out. We don't know where we may get infected. What is that we need to be alert about? Because now that you have 60 plus cases of below 45 already fighting for their life in your center, what is that you are observing? What is that they are doing wrong? And what is that we should be alert about?
Now, what we should be alert nowadays, in the second phase, as 70% and more cases are asymptomatic, right? People do not take it seriously. I will give you an example. We get below 45 cases positive. They are asymptomatic. They prefer home isolation. And all of a sudden, day 5 or day 6, decrease in the saturation. Then when we do this HRCT, the CORAD score is more than 12 or 13. So they are in moderate phase. We have encountered a number of cases in this way that we should take care now. 15 days before also, we had a discussion. I just had a discussion with Honorable AMC Bhide Madam, and we came with a solution and protocol. Even though you are at home isolation, there has to be a protocol for that. You cannot ignore asymptomatic positive patient. So we had made a protocol. Hope so. If it's circulated widely, it's so simple what medicine you have to take when your CT value is less than 30. What all basic investigation you have to take. What are the red flag signs? कि आपको बुखार आता है, cough आता है, when to do X-ray, when to do HRCT. Again, day before yesterday, I read a good article that we are doing random HRCTs now. Just like remdesivir, nowadays all affluent people, paying people. In inverted comma, if I am positive, I should do HRCT. Now we are
This
overburdening.
is the confusion which many people have today.
Vinod, just one second.
Yeah.
Just sometime we should open up to everybody if there are any questions.
So this is a question that what many people, Dr. Dere, if you can answer, when is that they need to go for HRCT or any other test even once the COVID is positive?
Now see, I think once you are positive, you have to do all your basic investigation. First do your X-ray, preliminary X-ray. First do your preliminary X-ray. If your intensivist or clinician feels that even after doing X-ray, even after doing n number of tests such as D-dimer, you do IL-6, CRP, LFTs, RFTs, then also you are not getting a progression of the disease to your medicine, and let the physician take a call. Now, HRCT is required for further treating this case.
Okay.
Even I also get a call from multiple, high-profile people every day. अरे 2 दिन हो गए आपने रेमडेसिविर क्यों नहीं दी? अरे 3 दिन हुआ HRCT कब निकाल रहे हो? If I say अरे already X-ray हमने निकाला है, and X-ray is purely normal.
Yeah.
नहीं HRCT निकाला उसमें कुछ निकल आएगा.
Yeah.
So somewhere we have to educate our own doctors. We have to educate our own healthcare people
Hmm.
not to be pressurized under these things. You follow strict protocol. We have to use our limited resources in a proper way. Then only we'll get a good productive output.
Sure. Rajesh, if you can keep the platform now open for any question that any of our member want to ask to the panel members, they can directly ask
Yeah, you
them.
can see some people have already sent you questions
Yeah,
now. You can
yeah.
ask them. With
So,
anyone else, I'll let you know.
yeah. So
They can also press the icon which
Yeah, yeah,
raise
yeah.
the hands. Then you can
yeah,
see
yeah.
who's got a question.
So this is first question from Vardarajan Krishnamurthy. His question is, any of the Dr. Dere or anyone can answer this. If a member in family is certified as corona positive and is under quarantine at home in a separate home, is it necessary to keep the house main door closed? Wanted to know if the door is closed, will it not affect cross ventilation and allow fresh air to enter the house? So Dr. Dere, what is that you would like to say, or Dr. Arun Bal, if you want to say
Yeah.
something on that?
Can I say
Yeah,
anything?
please. Dr.
See, once the person is isolated in a separate room, then there is no problem of keeping door closed or open as per the convenience. Isolation is important. If the person is isolated, then keeping the door closed or open has no relevance to that. It's isolation, wearing mask in the house, keeping his utensils separate so there is no mix up with the other family members, and other family members also should wear the masks. It's isolation, distancing, which is very important. And of course, free flow of air, just normal air is what is required.
Okay. There's another question that has come up from Pramod. His question is, what suggestion you experts want to give to the government to fight against corona effectively? What should be the immediate and long-term, the short-term and long-term measures that the government should take? So anyone, Dr. Dere, if you want to answer that question, or Dr. Subhash Hira, Arun ji, if you can, yeah. I'll come to Dr. Hira first and then come to Arun ji. Yeah, how do you put this answer to this question raised by Pramod?
Yeah, I think that there is quite a bit of inconsistency in the national and the state level policies and implementation with the waves that, or the spikes come and they form into waves. And a lot is actually related to the implementation gaps that I think are happening. And those are, of course, leading to inconsistencies in the case, like we heard Dr. Dere talk about remdesivir, for example. There are very clear protocols for the use of remdesivir, both from the ICMR as well as from AIMS. And there is no confusion unless you are talking about that remdesivir has its value, has its benefits in the later part of the moderate COVID as well as severe COVID. And if those times remdesivir is not available, I think we have lapsed in our own services to the people who are sick. So here is the area that there we need much more stronger accountability at all levels. And rather than we go into sudden breakdowns in supplies, whether we are talking of breakdown in the supplies of the vaccines or any of the life-saving drugs or even oxygen. So I think this is not just to say it happened the way pandemics are supposed to do this. We have written historical documents across the world which has talked about how were these Zika and how were Ebola, the cousin of this COVID, was overcome 3 times in Africa within 4 countries, and they were quarantined very quickly. There were fewer flights, there were fewer confusion, and it never became a pandemic. Ebola never became a pandemic,
If I have
despite
to give
3
three
times
reasons,
that it
3
broke out.
solutions that you would like to give to the government that they can come up with short-term and long-term goal to curtail the corona spread, what it could be?
Yes, I think one is the consistency of policies, that it has to be very clear, because we have suffered so clearly as a nation. As India, we suffered the first wave because we had people taking decisions in Delhi against the use of mask. Now, this is the fundamental error that India made in wave one, that it followed and said, well, we have no scientific evidence that the mask is going to be necessary for COVID. And that's as many countries did that mistake subsequently, including the United States did the same thing. The mistake again of not trying to, encouraging people to use masks, all have suffered. Now, so the process is we need to have the national group of experts who have experience of international pandemics rather than take and choose people according to their own choices. That is one, a strong war room team in the national and state levels. Second is accountability of all the essentials, whether the essentials we're talking in terms of treatments and diagnostics. There is no accountability in terms of the quality of RT-PCR tests, for example.
Okay. So this is another
We
question.
know that there are all sorts of RT-PCR and diagnostic rapid antigen tests available in the system. So those two things. The second is having the quality where there are major disasters, a good autopsy to make sure that it's not repeated. We don't want wave 3 or wave 4 because we know what it's going to be in store for all of us.
Appreciate that answer coming in from you, Dr. Hira. Dr. Rajesh Deire, this is a question for you from Mrityunjay Bose of Deccan Herald. His question is, Mumbai has been reporting 7,000 to 8,000 cases per day, as against 10,000 plus some days ago. Do we feel that the peak is gone and we are stabilizing now? That is his first question. And the second one, with your projection, what would be the timeline to get 50% plus people getting 2 jabs in Mumbai?
See, yes, in last few days there is a decreasing trend, but still I feel the lockdown is not complete now. 10 days before also we had some interaction. I told, we should have minimum 10 days complete lockdown. If you go by 10 days complete lockdown, this number would be less than 50%. If you outnumber this number by 50%, we'll see the change in the critical cases and availability of ventilator. Nowadays, in last 8 days, availability of ventilators, is a difficult task. We all know. And the reason is once you put any patient on ventilator, he has to stay on ventilator for minimum 10 days. Now, if you come through the vaccination phase, I'm really sorry to say, last 15 days, we are the biggest vaccination center of this state or probably Maharashtra. We have to keep our vaccination center closed for minimum 4 times.
Yeah.
We have a capacity of say 7,000 to 8,000 per day, and we are getting doses 3,000, 4,000.
Yeah. So you are hoping that the number might come down once we all get vaccinated, and this would bring down the number, especially when the 50 below people get the second jab at the earliest. Dr. Deire, are you connected?
We lost him.
We lost him.
Go for next. For next 2 years, we have to go for COVID now.
Okay. This is another question, maybe like anyone can answer. This is from Manisha Rege from PTI. How does one describe the second COVID wave that began from some cities in Vidarbha? And point 2 question from her side is, have you failed to plan for a possible recurrence? That is wave after wave after wave. And the third one, are symptoms varying from last year? Who would answer? I am throwing it open for the panel members.
Can I answer?
Yeah, please, Mr. Dr. Arun, please.
Yeah, see, taking her first question is that whether these symptoms differ. Symptoms are different now. Earlier, there was a loss of smell, there was a body ache. Now very few people get all those symptoms, and
Yeah.
many people are getting now nausea, vomiting, diarrhea. So I think any unusual symptom has to be taken as a COVID in the current pandemic situation, and isolate yourself. Don't keep on treating yourself at home. Just do the RT-PCR or a rapid antigen test at least, and isolate yourself so you will not spread.
Okay.
The
Second
second
question
question,
I'll read out to you. Have you
yeah,
failed to plan for a possible recurrence?
I think we have definitely failed to plan from vaccine point of view, from the beds, oxygen. See, I think uh, most of the people are not aware that in last 40 years, Bombay has only 2 or 3 public sector hospitals which have started. The rest of them are all private.
Yeah.
The average bed per thousand is only 0.5 still, and it was decided in 2017 by government it should be minimum 2.5.
True.
So if the beds are going to be in shortage, any, forget about pandemic, but any disaster also occurs, it's going to be shortage because we have not planned. We need a large scale government facilities. Something what is happening in COVID centers is not going to be permanent, but we need a permanent at every level. See the condition of our district hospital, taluka hospital, cottage hospital. So this is complete in there, disaster is just waiting to happen. What we have
Yeah.
not done for last 70 years. So there is an urgent need to do this. Otherwise, we will again face the third wave, fourth wave. And vaccines, I think vaccines have to be very, very aggressively given to everybody. But with the current situation, as Dr. Dere said, we may take 2 years to inoculate everybody. That's
Okay.
not going to work out.
Okay. Shubhra Tandon, she has a question. Again, Dr. Hira, if you can. She would like to know how reliable are RT-PCR tests in current times, because despite patients testing negative multiple times are getting finally caught with the infection in CT scan, and sometimes it is too late. That is the first question. You want me to read out the other two? I can do that simultaneously. Is it true that the new strain of the virus is attacking the lungs directly and not getting detected in the RT-PCR? And the third one, should CT scan, 1 minute, I'll just check. Yeah. Should CT scan be made mandatory after RT-PCR, or what are the symptoms to be watched out for before CT? So these are the 3 questions that Shubhra has asked.
Okay, I think they're very good questions. One is that right from the beginning, where we started off with the RT-PCR for COVID, and the kits that were first cleared, very clear that the sensitivity of those RT-PCR tests was 70%, so that people who actually were harboring the COVID virus, and when they were being tested, only 70% were being tested positive. The remaining were getting a false negative. Now, the entire process of molecular diagnostics is such that even if you improve it further, you might go from 70% to 80%, but there are going to be a lot of false positives. That's why you have any form of backups that you repeat after a few days. Otherwise, if the symptoms are all there, at least isolate them at home, quarantine them at home, so that the transmission and all. The whole thing then has gone into very poor quality control. So that is worrying me a lot, not only for RT-PCR, but even the antigen and the antibody tests that are rapid tests. The second question is that true that these variants, I have published in international journal on the Indian variants, and we will circulate to you the link for those who are interested in seeing the variants that we have looked at in different parts of India through the ICMR labs. Here it is clear that the mutant forms or the new forms of the virus are actually attaching much more aggressively onto the ACE receptors that are present in the lungs in a very large number. So that what was going as a traditional virus was affecting the nose and the throat. Here you have that it finds much more number of the receptors where it can go attach and get into the lung tissue. in abundant quantity in the lung tissue. So that answers your second question.
Yeah.
And the third one, I think I need reminder
Yeah,
on the
it
third
was
one.
RT-PCR test in current times because despite patients testing negative multiple times, are getting finally caught with infection in CT scan, and sometimes it is too late.
Yeah, I think the CT scan is being, as Dr. Dere very rightly said, I'm glad he brought it up. CT scan is supposed to be a supplementary test, and it has been used. India is spending a lot more money on these things. The first is an X-ray chest, and that's where we begin. Unless a patient comes with very obvious reasons for going straight away to the CT scan, which can be 5–10% suspect. That is, a CT scan has its own value, but as a supplemental, our X-ray chest is the mainstay here, and that's where we should have a proper. These protocols are good and it should be done properly rather than we jump the gun all the time. Yeah.
Appreciate that answer coming in from you, Dr. Hira. Dr. Dere, this is a question for you from Yasir Pittalwala. Dr. Dere, are you there with us? Dr. Dere?
He's gone off, I think.
Okay. This can then be answered by Dr. Arun Bal. Is Dr. Dere around? Okay, fair. So Dr. Arun Bal, if you can answer Mr. Pittalwala, this question has been raised by him. What is the protocol in terms of medication and pathology tests to be followed in mild positive cases? Some doctors are prescribing facility which some medical professionals say is as good as giving a placebo. What you would like to say?
See, I think if the patient has the symptoms which are suggestive of COVID, then you do basic tests like blood count, CRP, renal function, electrolytes, and inflammatory markers like CRP, LDH, and you also check D-dimer and interleukin-6. These are the 7 or 8 tests you must get done. If these values are more and if the patient starts getting fever, then you need to give antiviral drug. Commonest use is a favipiravir, which has to be given in a 1800 milligrams twice a day for first day and 800 milligram twice a day for day 2, 3, and 4. Then you can give vitamins and vitamin D as a supportive treatment. The most important is that patient must check the oxygen concentration daily. The simple test is walk for 6 minutes and check the concentration. If it drops below 2, which is there at a resting time, that's a signal that your lungs are getting involved. In that case, one of the things which is given is a dexamethasone for 8 milligram twice a day. But I think before that you need to consult your doctor. But this is a very crucial test. If as long as you are maintaining your saturation, there is nothing really urgent which can happen. And of course, you have to isolate. You can take inhalation, you can do breathing exercise. All these supportive things have to be there. But you need to keep a watch, isolation, have a good food. The crucial time is from day 0, that is the day of starting of symptom, up to 5th day. After 5th day is the something which you 5th to 8th day, if you start getting reduction in oxygen saturation after walking for 6 minutes, I think you should immediately contact your doctor and try to get a CT scan. But initially you can take a X-ray chest if you have a facilities. If it shows clear, then with this much, most of the time after 10 days, you will be infection free.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Dr. Bal. Dr. Dere, if you can join, this is a question, personal one from Mr. Vardarajan. Are you there, Dr. Dere?
He's gone off, I think.
I can see him here.
Yeah, he's there. He's there.
Okay, Dr. Dere, can you unmute yourself? Okay, Dr. Hira, if you can help Mr. Vardarajan, it's a personal question. His son is 14 days in quarantine now, and he want to know he's on medication for mild COVID positive, and can other members go out for their second dose of vaccination? His son is already showing mild positive, COVID positive, and he want to know whether other members in the family can go for the second dose of jab.
Yeah, I think the vaccine jab is preferably delayed for at least a month after the quarantine period is over. And that is the reason. So his quarantine period is over, and he will benefit by postponing his vaccine second jab
Yeah.
by an extra month, so that he is letting the system settle down, because there are a lot of possibilities of other inflammatory things happening, even when the transmission vulnerability is almost zero. It's not going to be able to transmit virus, but could have inflammatory levels which have not healed yet. So
But what
it's
about other
better
members?
that to avoid any form of coagulation or coagulopathy, it's better that you have one month break.
And what about other
then
family members? Other family members?
resume your
Dr.
other
Hira,
family members, as long as they have not been diagnosed with COVID, they can go ahead and have their vaccines.
okay.
Vaccines are safe that way for the rest of the family members.
Okay. Dr. Bal, you will be able to answer the next question coming from Prachi. She want to know what post-COVID care is required for person with diabetic and cardiac with stents at the age of 54.
See, most of the time when COVID treatment, which includes cortisone, the blood sugar invariably increases. So if the patient is on an oral hypoglycemic drug, the patient may require insulin of different types. So even after stopping steroids, the blood sugar takes almost 8 to 15 days to settle. So maintaining of a blood sugar, it is very important. You need to continue insulin, and the dose has to be monitored by regular monitoring, fasting, post-lunch blood sugar. That is one. Second thing, blood pressure control is very important. You need to continue statins. You need to continue anticoagulants for 15 days, not aspirin, but something like a Xarelto or Equalis, which is given twice a day to prevent hypercoagulability. So these are the basic things which you have to control when you have a diabetes, hypertension, and you have suffered a COVID infection. And as I said earlier, in next after your quarantine period and all is over, anytime you get any unusual symptom, there can be variety of unusual symptom from abdominal pain to giddiness to leg pain. I think you need to contact your doctors immediately, because this can be post-COVID thrombosis.
Okay. Okay. So there is another question, Dr. Hira, if you can answer. This is from Samar. He want to ask how many cases of COVID death have come across the notice of the doctors who had both either Covaxin or Covishield. Anyone can answer this one. Was there any case of death due to taking the jab, either Covaxin or Covishield? Has any death been reported due to vaccine, or if not due to vaccine, whether it is due to some comorbid condition that you have come across in India or anywhere outside?
We haven't heard of any reported death with any of these 11 million, 12 million vaccinated people. Yet there were some 4 or 5 of them who had some minor side effects, but we haven't heard of any deaths. But there are larger studies that just came out in global medical journals, and that showed that out of 7 million people who got Pfizer vaccine, and they were able to follow those 7 million certain number of people at any side effects that happened, in 5,000 of them, 350 of them actually died.
Okay.
So we are saying that those who had completed both the doses, 7 million people, that is 70 lakh people,
okay.
There were 350 who died subsequently because they got reinfected with COVID.
Okay. Okay. So there's a question from Pramod. He just wanted to ask basically if RT-PCR is negative but CT scan is positive, which test should be confirmatory?
So if RT-PCR is negative, the one thing is you repeat after 72 hours. But if CT scan shows what is known as a CORAD score of anywhere 8 to 10, that is a mild to moderate COVID, then that person requires hospitalization. He may require cortisons and other treatment. and also remdesivir, depending upon what is his general condition and what are his comorbidities. So if CT scan shows this score of above 8 to 10, it's safer that person is in some sort of a health facility. It need not be an ICU, it need not be a very high standard facility, but there has to be oxygen available and basic medical care.
Okay. The second last question maybe from Renuka. Once you are diagnosed with COVID, for how many days do you stand the risk of being a carrier? When is it safe to be out of isolation? Also, is an X-ray mandatory once you are diagnosed with COVID, even if you don't have major cough issue? Dr. Hira
Yeah.
or Dr. Bal, anyone?
Yes, usually after 10 to 12 days of diagnosis, the infectivity goes, but ideally you should isolate yourself for 14 to 21 days. Then you can go out. X-ray is important as a screening tool because many times by the time you start getting cough, it may be advanced. So as I said, some basic medical tests are done, blood test. Along with that, if you have facilities, you should have a baseline X-ray. So when you get a cough, then you can correlate with that and do this. But 14 to 21 days isolation from the day your RT-PCR becomes positive is required. But after 10 days, that person will not be infective to others, but it is safer to isolate, wear mask, not to go in a crowd, and maintain diet and all these things.
Okay. Dr. Hira, the question is basically for you in terms of the environmental damage, and which is a matter of concern. Amidst COVID and the death that used to happen, doctors would say that you apply sodium hypochlorite, you do the body kept in the body bag, and especially when it goes for burial. Now, the concern here is about when you have a body laced with sodium hypochlorite, it's a chemical. You have a body bag, which is nothing but a plastic bag. When you bury those bodies deep in the soil for almost 6 feet, there are microorganisms that also get impacted. And it's a known fact that, like, the degradation of plastic takes years and years and years. Do you think we are heading towards a major environmental crisis amidst COVID because of lack of knowledge about our environmental damage that we are doing by using these chemicals, and whether these chemicals can be used, bodies can be wrapped in plastic? I'm referring to the burial. The cremation is still fine. We know that, like, everything is taken care of, but disposal of dead body with wrapped body bags and having laced with sodium hypochlorite, what environmental damage do you foresee the coming generation will have to face? Dr. Hira.
Yeah, I think you're very right. Related to the burial of dead bodies with a lot of plastic and something that is not biodegradable. We are using a lot of chemicals that will, of course, in large numbers now. Obviously, it emits a lot of chlorine, as sodium hypochlorite does. I think the traditional way of burial used to be using the coffin box, which was made up of wood, and never used plastic in it, so that they were all biodegradable. And so the soil actually took care of everything. We are actually causing biodiversion in or bio problem. Biodiversion is the best word, by mass burials as a result of COVID or any major disasters. And we have to have a proper guidelines for them, because it's just taken for granted that we follow a certain system and have not now looked at that we are looking at a lot of burials in small concentrated places. And these places obviously are getting close to residential areas. So that itself is going to contaminate the underground water, for example. And that water then seeps into wells and the water is then consumed. So there is a lot of health issue, the environmental issue, which I think we need to address.
Okay. There are a lot of questions that are coming in from Renuka. Shubhra has a connected question. What we will be doing is that we'll be sharing Dr. Arun and Dr. Hira's mobile number or maybe your email IDs can be shared with our members, because there are some questions which are quite personal. They have to clarify certain doubts that they have. I will request, like, post the session, Dr. Hira, Dr. Bal, I'll collect your email ID and contact details so that that can be shared with the members who are present today. We come to the end of the session. It was a really interesting talk and touching on all various aspects. I would like to request Gurbir to come online and address the crowd as we wind up our meet for the day. Thanks once again from my side. It was great pleasure having Dr. Arun Bal, Dr. Hira, Dr. Dere, Dr. Savardekar. I could not continue with him because of the line issue, but nevertheless, it was a great discussion that we could have. Mr. Gurbir.
Thank you, all the panelists. I think a lot of effort has been put in for answering these questions as well as making the presentations. They were really astounding amount of information has been brought to us. So all the three panelists, thank you very much. And a special thanks to Vinod also, who's been generating the questions and putting the questions, taking it back and forth. So it's been a great session. All I'd like to communicate is that within the Press Club Managing Committee, we've thought of this topic as something which is going to be with us for some time. So we're going to be keeping going on this. So the next round will be on policy matters, where we will try and bring together, say, the Minister for Health, Mr. Tope. We'll try and get the Municipal Commissioner, certain other officers who are in charge of policy and administration, because shortage of oxygen, and these are the other things which are confronting the public. And there are a lot of questions around that. So that would be the next session. And till we are sort of facing this crisis and going through this crunch, we'll keep coming back with more such sessions. And I think not only as journalists are we interested in it, but through the platform of the Press Club, we try and communicate to the general public and try and bring these various issues which are being raised among the public and the various crises that we are going through. We try and see that at least some answers are addressed and people's minds are laid to rest. So thank you for a very, very interesting and absorbing session. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank
Thank
you.
you. Pleasure.
Thank you,
Thank
Mr. Menon.
Thank you, Mr. Hira. I'll be in touch. Thank you.
No,